Like a lot of you guys, I put on Christ in baptism when I was in high school. And right after I made that decision, I'll never forget, like you've probably experienced, countless people walk down that aisle after that baptism, and they encouraged me, they supported me, they gave me hugs. And of course, what usually happens right after you make that decision is a lot of people give you a lot of advice. And you'll hear even things like, I'm proud of you, we love you, we're here for you, welcome to God's family. And I heard a lot of different things. I heard a lot of encouragement. I heard a lot of words of advice. But I have to tell you, there's one piece of advice that stood out to me among all the things that I heard that night. And so right after I was baptized, my dad wrapped the towel around me as we started walking down those steps. And then my wet feet were hitting that floor. He put his arm around me. And he said something to me that at first to me didn't really make that much sense. And I thought, could you have given something a little different? But right after he put that towel around me and we walked through that door, he said, Andrew, what I want you to know is that you're not going to be perfect. But what I want you to do and what God wants you to do is just to continue to walk with him and to pursue righteousness. See, what I thought he was going to say is, son, I'm proud of you. I thought what he was going to say is, hey, go out there. You got this. But the reality is I on my own don't got this. And at that time, it didn't really mean that much to hear, you're not going to be perfect, but walk with him. But now when I think about the story of the way God has worked in my life, that phrase, that sentence, has meant even more. So right after that decision in high school, one of the highlights for me in my life was I could not wait to get to Faulkner University. My high school years, mom and dad both worked at Faulkner. Mom was the church secretary on the church that was right literally on campus, and my dad had the job of student activities director. And what was awesome about dad having that job is basically he was like the fun guy. He was doing and organizing all the fun things that happened on campus. They would go on ski trips. They would go whitewater rafting. They would go to Hawks games. They would go to Braves games. He would plan and organize Jamboree, the on-campus musical where girls get guys to be able to sing and dance in front of other people. He would organize things like Capital City Steps devotionals. He would organize these service campaigns, and if there were people in other parts of the United States that had a catastrophe come through, they would load up all of those vans and all of those buses at Faulkner, and we would go and help them and all of those things. And so as a kid, I got to experience those Capital City Step devos. I got to experience Tuesday night devo. I got to see chapel. I got to go to Jamboree. I got to see intramurals. I saw all of these things, and I thought, man, when I get to Faulkner, my faith in my life, my habits, my goals, all of those things are just going to skyrocket. And so I was so detailed in how that time was going to be and what that was going to look like because it only made sense. I'm going to be surrounded by a lot of good people with a faculty and staff that really care about me and want to kind of encourage me and challenge me to take me to that next level. And so I was so detailed in what this time was going to look like. I even remember with my roommate, and by the way, you think girls just do this. It's not true. Guys do too. I planned my dorm room to the T. Like I knew the exact bedding that I was going to use. I knew exactly where my mini fridge was going to be in our room. And I knew exactly where I was going to hang my Vince Carter poster. I knew where everything was going to be in that room. And so I had a plan. I had a rhythm of how that time was going to be. And so I moved on campus about 3 or 4 months before everybody else. And the reason is I was playing soccer at that time for Faulkner. Now, by the way, when you hear that, do not be impressed. The only reason I was really playing soccer was because I was Church of Christ, and they needed somebody basically on away trips to serve and organize communion. So that's really the only reason why they let me on the team. And so I'll never forget at one of those practices, my dad walked up. And that wasn't really unusual. Dad was very supportive of my sister and I, and so he walked up and watched our practice. And while he's watching that practice, I noticed that he did something a little different, and that's that he stayed after practice. And so I ran up to him. I was like, hey, Dad, how are you doing? And if you know my dad, he's a very upbeat, jovial, happy person, usually always has something positive to say. And I could tell there was something different. I was like, well, Dad, how are you doing? He's like, well, actually, not good. Like, what do you mean you're not doing good? He said, well, I wanted to come out here today to let you know something. And it's really hard for me to let you know this right now because I know you've like really looked forward to this time in your life. But I just found out that I have cancer. And so I was like, well, okay, well, is there like a pill you can take? Is there a surgery we can have? We can get on with this and move on quickly. He said, well, no, and that's partly why I'm here today. Is to let you know that the diagnosis that they've really given me is right now they think I have about 6 months to a year to live. Now, by the way, my dad is alive, and that is a whole nother lesson that speaks to the power of what Philip Brookman was talking about this morning, the power, the opportunity of prayer. And let me tell you guys, I believe this with all of my heart. When our prayers go up, there is power that comes down. And I remember when I heard this, yes, my heart, it broke for my dad, it broke for our family, and it broke even for me. And there was, yes, a part of me that was really sad to hear this. But I have to be completely real with all of you tonight and let you know that the first emotion and the first thing that I thought of was not my dad. But the first thing I thought of was me. This was not the plan that I had for my freshman year. Are you kidding me? This is not what I wanted to happen. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, here I am supposed to do all these things, and then I get this kind of news. How am I supposed to enjoy those kind of things? And so what you'll notice about me is that when my heart should be breaking for somebody else, all that could happen really, if you notice by the attitude I had, was my heart was just broken for myself. And that pride that was in my heart should have been the greatest awareness that sin was on the horizon, because what you'll find in your life every single time is that pride is the chief instigator of every single sin. And so I heard this news, and all I could think about was me. Well, then, once school actually started, one of the things that I started to notice in my life is that little by little, I began to put up this wall of sin between me and God. Now, I didn't have like one big sin. You know, some people have those stories, those testimonies of like, well, God delivered me out of the den of this amazing big thing. I made this really poor choice and I had the scars to prove it. That's not really what happened with me. Really what it was with me was one unrepented sin after another unrepented sin after another unrepented sin. What it looked like for me was one bad decision, one poor choice on a date, one poor decision with what I watched, one poor choice of what I said, one poor choice of what I did. And little by little, I began to build this wall. And meanwhile, which I think was kind of my way of trying to push aside what the real problem was, I just started signing up for everything on campus. I was like, well, maybe that'll help me ignore the real issue. And so SGA did it. I remember extra soccer practice. I was there, needed it. I remember that I was in Jamboree. I was working on trying to be involved with the service club that was on campus. If there was something going on, I was signing up for it. But meanwhile, I was so involved in other things that I began to notice that I was detaching myself from the church. I was not really progressing my relationship with God. All I really was doing through these distractions, and those distractions, by the way, will always come at a cost. I found myself slowly disconnecting from my relationship with God. And so in the middle of this, here I am in my sophomore year, 2 years of this. I'll never forget that my campus minister called me into his office. And he said, Andrew, I always want to talk to you about something. You know, since I've been here on campus, I had the privilege of seeing you as a young man grow up in the youth group. I even remember the day you put on Christ in baptism. And I was so excited about you being here, and I am still excited about you being here, but I just have to tell you, I've just noticed over the past 2 years that you're kind of getting more and more detached from the church. You're detaching yourself from people. You're doing and you're saying things that don't really sound like you, and they don't really sound like Christ. And I'll never forget what he said. He said this, Andrew, do you like right now the direction of where your life is headed? And every single one of us have those little, I guess we would say, defining moments in our life where we can like kind of point to that in this time, God got me back in rhythm with him. It was that really uncomfortable, that really hard conversation, I'm telling you, that made a huge difference. See, what I had realized is that I had a plan, a rhythm of what I wanted life to be. But then a circumstance came into that life, and then what I started to notice is I started to build up this wall of sin. I became too focused on myself, and I became so distracted with so many good things that it caused me to miss out on the more important things. And what I found in my life is that I had gotten out of rhythm. See, one thing that I know about our good God is this: God is a God of rhythms. In fact, some of you last night were at the beach, and when you were walking down that beach, you saw the moon out. Did you know that there's actually a rhythm between the moon and the ocean tide? And depending on where that moon is, it impacts whether the tide is in or out. There's a rhythm to your body that if your heart beats in a certain way, or something is maybe even off on your spinal cord, and those nerves then go to those organs, that if something is off with your heart, if something is off with your spinal cord, it impacts a functioning use of your limbs. It impacts a functioning use of those organs. And so if something is off here, if something is off on the inside, if something is off in our nucleus, it then impacts everything else. Instead of being in rhythm, all you and I look like really is distorted noise. And the problem, I think, for a lot of us is not that we haven't started in rhythm. But the problem is maybe for a lot of us is we find ourselves not being able to keep the beat. It kind of reminds me of when I was in fifth grade. We had a fifth grade chorus, and the fifth grade chorus at Alabama Christian Academy was mandatory. So you can imagine how we sounded because it was mandatory. I was not helping the room. I just want to tell you that. And I'll never forget Miss Atkinson told us, she said, all right, we're going to do a performance for your family. And so what we're going to do, I want you to watch my hands. And I want you to hear and to see as my hands come up and down that as we sing together, you follow the beat of what you see in my hands. And so she would get going and man, we would start that song and it was awesome. We were so good at starting the song, but we could not keep the rhythm. And so time and time, you should like, stop. All right, ready? Here we go. And we started well, but we just couldn't keep the beat. So what she decided to do was to bring into the room this device. How many of you know what this is? Yeah, we got a lot of music folks in here. All right, you can put your hands down. This is called a metronome. And you can't hear it, of course, in the video, but in the video, what a metronome sounds like basically is all sorts of things. It can make a t sound or a dum sound, or, just something to hear like a dum, 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 dum. And so what Miss Atkinson did, and she said, I'm going to bring this metronome into this room, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to press play, and you're going to hear the click in the back of your ear, and as you hear that click in the back of your ear, just stay on the beat with that metronome. So she would start the song, and we would start singing, and hearing that metronome in the back of our heads, it's amazing that this group that really could not keep a beat, this group that really didn't want to be there, this group that really didn't sound that great, all of a sudden sounded awesome because we had something besides us. That metronome to me is a picture of what God wants to do in our hearts and what he wants to do in our lives. It's only God that can help us make beautiful noise. It's only God that can help us to play the song that we should be playing. And if our heart is out of rhythm with God's heart, what we will find every single time is our souls are going to suffer. And so I would dare to say that for most of us in the room, the problem is not that we haven't started well. We start well. It's that we've struggled to keep the beat. So that's why I love this verse that I'm going to show you in just a second. It's from Colossians 2. And I love this verse because Paul is acting like a spiritual parent, a youth minister, a shepherd. And what he's doing here is he says, I want so badly to be like right beside you. And in fact, what I want to tell you that I have been doing for you is I have been contending for you. I've been praying for you when you have no clue that I've ever been around. And when I hear him say this in Colossians 2, it makes me think of my mom and dad. It makes me think of me with my kids. And it makes me think of you because whether you realize this or not, your parents are constantly walking by your room when you are asleep. They're praying over you or they're praying for you more than you realize. And I want you to understand that your youth ministers, your shepherds at your congregation, they're praying for you too. And so countless times I'll walk by my little boy's room, I'll walk by my little girl's room, and I'll start to pray. And the heart behind my prayer is really the same heart that Paul has here in his prayer. He says, look, when I look at you, I see these two things. Number one, I see that there's so much potential in every single one of you. But the second thing that I see when I look out is that Satan is real and Satan is alive. And so I'm contending for you. I'm praying for you. And this is what he says. He says, therefore, as you have received Christ, he's saying, listen, you've made the decision to put on Christ. Great, that's awesome. But the struggle is this, that yes, you've received him, but you've struggled to keep the beat. You've struggled to walk in him. What's happened is this, that you haven't been rooted, meaning it's beneath the surface. It's not just those surface level things. Maybe the problem is that you've been building out instead of up. You're building in a way to draw attention to yourselves. You're building in a way to not bring glory to the Father, but to bring glory to you. I know that's what happened with me. He says, if you will not just make a one-time decision, but continue in the walk, he says, that's when you'll be abounding in praise. That's when you'll play the song that you should be playing. Do you see what he's doing when he speaks of salvation? Do you see what he's saying when he even speaks of salvation and baptism? That what he's wanting us to understand is that when you went into that watery grave and came out, that was not just a life-saving decision. It was meant to be a life-changing decision. It's not just about receiving him, but it's about walking in him. To play the same song that he's playing. Because I'm telling y'all, otherwise we're going to sound like distorted noise. So what I want to do tonight is I want to encourage you that maybe you're like me, that you've gotten off beat. You find yourself at times not playing the same song that God's playing. The great news is we can get back on rhythm. So maybe for some of you, you're like me, that what got you out of rhythm and what is getting you out of rhythm right now is that you're just simply distracted. Like you're doing a lot of good things, but the problem is the good things you're doing are knocking out that margin, that space in your life to actually do more essential things, better things. And one of the things that I think about is when people came up to me in college and they said, hey, Andrew, how you doing? I would always say, I'm busy. How's it going, Andrew? Busy. And let me tell you, I wore that busy badge like it was a badge of honor. But I have to tell y'all, I have seen where busy gets me, and I don't like it. I have stopped speaking busy over my life because I've seen how busy has caused me to neglect my family. I've seen how busy has caused me to neglect my marriage. I've seen how busy has caused me to neglect my relationship with God. I don't want that over my life anymore. And so when I think about this, I think about how what happened with me is maybe what happens to you is you have your calendar filled with so many activities, but those activities for you have become a liability. See, that's exactly what happened in Luke chapter 10 to a lady named Martha. This is one of my favorite narratives in the entire Bible. Jesus shows up in Bethany at the house of Mary and Martha. These are two of Jesus' closest friends. And as you can see in this text, that when Jesus comes to the house, Martha runs to the door, shakes Jesus' hand, she gives him the seat of honor, and then she goes into the kitchen and she starts working. And here's what Martha is doing. She is doing what culture says she should be doing. What I mean by that, there was a cultural expectation during this day that when someone came into your house, you were supposed to greet them at the door and you were supposed to be busy with all the other activities. You were supposed to be preparing the table. You were supposed to be in the kitchen. And so I remember as a kid hearing this story and even sitting in the audience when my preacher was sharing it, not knowing the ending. And here Martha is doing all of these things, and then there's Mary just sitting there at the feet of Jesus. I was like, oh man, he's about to give it to Mary. I mean, she's just sitting there. Martha's doing all these things. I mean, what are you doing, Mary? I mean, if you don't get in there, the casserole's going to burn, and the matzo crackers and the Welch's 100 are not going to serve themselves. I mean, come on, we've got to get things moving, but here you are just sitting there. I bet Jesus is about to give it to Martha. What does that tell you about my heart? What does that tell you today about our cultural expectations? I want to tell you guys that just whatever culture expects does not mean that is really what is needed. So here Martha is so busy doing so many things, that Jesus says, but Martha was what? Distracted. But it says that she was distracted with what? Serving. But I thought that the Son of Man came to serve, not be served. I thought the Son of Man got down on all fours and took the role of a servant and got down and washed nasty feet. Serving is what we're supposed to be doing. Why would that be a distraction? Well, here's what I want you to see, that sometimes you can do the work of God in a way that it can actually destroy the work of God in you. Like an example of that is when I first got into ministry. I remember that anything that happened on campus, I was at. Which sounds like what you're supposed to be doing, but then it was causing me to neglect my family. It was causing me to neglect my marriage. It was causing me to neglect my own walk with God. I was doing a lot of stuff. I was doing the work of God, but the problem was the way I was doing the work of God was actually destroying the work of God in me. Like, you can do the work of God in a way to bring attention to yourself, it's going to destroy you. You can do the work of God in a way to appease other people, it's going to destroy you. You can do the work of God in a way that will, make you feel good about yourself, but that's going to destroy you too. And so what you'll notice in this text is that Jesus is not really attracted to what she's doing. And notice what this kind of mindset does. It gets you to say to Jesus, Lord, do you not care? I mean, come on. She just said that to the Son of Man. A distracted heart's going to do that to you. Now, please understand that when Jesus is upset with the way that Martha is doing all of these things, he's not upset at Martha for how she is designed and how she is made. This is not an Enneagram issue. Because here's the thing, we need Marthas in this world, and we also need Marys. Like, when you go on a hike, you don't just want Mary. Mary's going to look at the colors. She's going to get off the trail, maybe chase a butterfly. You need Martha because she's going to bring a compass and say, Mary, get back on the track. Like, we need Marthas and we need Marys. This is not a design issue. The issue is not necessarily what Martha was doing, but it was the way she was doing it, who she was becoming, but also how she was missing out on the guest of honor because she was so focused on the dinner party. She was distracted. In fact, I looked up this word this week, and one of the commentaries pointed out that in the Greek, what it really implies is that Martha had lost her why. She lost, why am I serving? Why am I doing this? And the danger of losing your why, if you lose your why, you will lose your way. You'll see it every time. I think about how I used to be one of the worst people to go on a family vacation with. And the reason is, I like to have everything scheduled. At 8 o'clock, we're leaving. And 10:30, we're going to be at the beach. And then at 12:30, we're going to eat lunch. And then at 2, the kids are going to go down for a nap. Then at 5, we're going to go eat dinner. Then at 8:30, we're going to start to head to the condo. And then when you have 3 kids, they'd like to take that plan, punt it into next week. And so I remember the first vacation we took as a family of 3, we're 2 hours behind my schedule. And then we get in the car, and then one of the children decides to have an accident, and then we have to stop there in the median and fling stuff into the median. And then we go a little further. We finally get to the condo, and I had purposefully called this place and said, can we be on the first floor? And by the way, some of y'all were laughing at me when I was, that little cart where you carry all your luggage in? It looked like I was moving in the Brady Bunch. Even the guy at the front desk said, how many people do you have in your room? So anyway, I wanted to be on the first floor because I didn't want to lug all this stuff up a flight or 2. And the guy said, sorry, we don't have anything on the first floor. I was like, but I had reserved the first floor. He's like, sorry, 4th floor. And so I thought, well, that's not a big deal. What could go wrong? We get on the elevator. One of my kids touches the fire alarm. So we then get into the room and we start to unload everything. And what I'll remember is I carried a lot of the anxiety that I had in my heart up into that room. And I'll never forget that Lorianne said, hey, Andrew, it might be a good idea if you go walk on the beach. That was basically her way of saying, hey, you need to calm down. And so I did. I guess I'm self-aware enough to know that I did need to do that. But so I walked down to the beach, and I'll never forget as I stood at the edge of that shore and those waves began to hit my feet one after another in perfect rhythmic motion. God, in the vastness of his creation and how small I realized I was, he got me back on rhythm with him. And I'll never forget in that moment, realize, wow, the goal of this is to spend time with my family, but I've turned it into not a fun time. What I'm saying is, like Martha, I forgot my why. And again, the danger of this is if you lose your why, you lose your way. So maybe for some of you, what the distraction is not maybe the dinner party per se. Maybe for some of you, it's the device. Did you know that we spend an average of 1,700 minutes a day? I didn't even know there were that. And we touch our phones 1,400 times a day on average. I don't know about y'all, like I get that little reminder of screen time was last week was this, no, that can't be right. Can't be right. And the danger of this distraction is that there is actually a cost. They say that when you get on your phone in the middle of a task that you're doing, on average, it takes you 23 minutes to get back doing the thing that you were actually doing. Now, I know you guys go to a lot of youth stuff and hear people talk about technology. You're like, oh no, this is another one of those guys telling us to burn our phones and churn butter. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I do think that there is a big difference in using technology and being used by technology. So when I look at Jesus' ministry, what you'll notice is, was he the Savior of the world? Absolutely. Did he come to seek and to save the lost? Absolutely. Did he go to weddings and other stuff? Absolutely. But one thing you'll notice about Jesus' ministry is he understood the value of slowing down and enjoying the moment. Like, do y'all remember that time where he was being pushed and pressed by the crowd to go to Jairus' house because they thought that's where he needed to be? Jairus had an important name. This woman had no name. Then what did Jesus do? When the crowd is pressing on him, this one woman just barely touches the hem of his garment and he goes, shroom. I think about a time when the disciples were even confused and thinking, man, you might be hungry because you went so much out of the way to meet this woman at a well that had 5 husbands, and the guy that she's with now isn't even her husband. And Jesus, there was this time where we were on a really important trip going to do something really important to talk to this group of people, the scribes, the Pharisees that have really been standing in your way, but you see the need to talk to a man that has been sitting on a mat for 38 years surrounded by people that can actually infect you. Do you notice something about Jesus in his ministry? He is unrushed. We follow an unrushed Jesus. And so if we follow an unrushed Jesus, doesn't it make sense that we should all be living very unrushed lives? Like, think about some of the greatest compliments that the Bible gives people. It's Enoch and Noah. They what? Walked with God. The idea of walking with somebody means in Amos chapter 3, verse 3, it says that if you don't walk with somebody, you can't agree with somebody. We wonder, like, why is this group doing that? Well, have you broke bread? Because that's what I'm saying, is that you can't ever get to a point of agreement if you don't walk. But yet we run through life and we think God is running with us. Here's what I want you to know, he's not. See, what I want to encourage you to do is every single morning, and this is piggybacking off of what Philip said this morning, is that when your alarm goes off in the morning, it is so tempting to get on Instagram, to get on something else, to see what the world says about you. I want you to spend that time in prayer first, to focus, to think about what he says about you more than what they say. Don't y'all think it's well past time that we start enjoying the unrushed, unhurried rhythms of God's amazing grace? So maybe you're distracted. Or maybe for some of you, you're like me, that you've built up a wall of sin. Like I told you, it wasn't just like one big thing. It was little thing after a little thing. But what turns out, what I perceive to be little, ends up being big when it's stacked upon one unrepented sin after another. One of my most pivotal passages that I have highlighted in the Bible that I had when I was at Faulkner came on a retreat that we took called Be Still. And at this retreat, our campus minister used this passage, Isaiah 59, 1 and 2. And in the passage, and it's still highlighted, it says, "Is God too weak to save you?" Y'all want to answer that question together? Is God too weak to save you? Okay. And then it says this, "Is God too weak to hear you?" Y'all want to answer that question? What do you think? So I read this passage, I'm like, okay, is God too weak to save me? No. Is God too weak to hear me? No. So what's the issue? And it says this, that your sins have cut you off from God. Now, when it says that, please understand what it's not saying. That if you are a Christian and you sin, hear me on this, you are still a Christian. But unrepented sin on top of another unrepented sin on another unrepented sin is going to affect the relationship. Take marriage as an example. That if I sin against Lorianne and I put an unrepented sin down, are we still married? Yes. But I put another unrepented sin and another unrepented sin and another unrepented sin. Are we still married? Yes, by title we are. But unrepented sin after another unrepented sin after another unrepented sin, are we by title still married? Absolutely. But what I want you to see, the relationship is not what it used to be. And what can happen little by little, you'll find yourself getting to a place you never thought you would be. And here's what I want you to understand about those walls. They will make you sick. Take, for example, a picture of this. This is the Berlin Wall. It came around 1961. And this wall separated East and West Germany. And right after this wall went up, this East German psychiatrist started to notice that his office was getting flooded with way more people once the wall went up. He noticed that people that were coming into his office were at an all-time high for depression, anxiety, sin, making poor choices, and the list can go on. He's like, well, what in the world is happening? Maybe it's just, just happens to be this time of year. Maybe it's just the world right now. But then he started studying 1 mile, 2 miles, 10 miles, 30 miles away from the wall. The further he got away from the wall, he started to realize, as he called all these other psychiatrists and all these other counselors, that the need for counseling was going down the further you were away from the wall. And so what he realized is what was making people sick is this wall has come right down the middle of a group of people that used to play t-ball together. This wall has come right down the middle of a group of people that used to be in PTA together. This wall has come down the middle of a group of people that go to worship together. This wall has now come down the middle of a group of people that used to play soccer at the park together. And what was happening was this group of people that used to enjoy life together, a wall has now come down the middle, and now the relationship is not what it used to be. So around 1980-something, that wall came down, and that same East German psychiatrist started noticing that once the wall went down, there's less people being sick. In Exodus chapter 32, Moses was up on the mountain. He was receiving the 10 Commandments, and while this was happening, the people down on the bottom, and Aaron being a terrible leader, they're like, it's kind of been a while since, we've heard from Moses. We really need to do something. So Aaron's like, I got a good idea. Why don't you take that jewelry that God actually gave you when you left Egypt, let's burn it and make it into an idol. And today we will worship that. But don't worry, tomorrow we're actually going to go back and we're going to worship God. We're going to have his day. That's what Exodus 32:5 says. Tomorrow he's going to have his day. So they do exactly that. And then Moses comes down the mountain. God is furious. Moses is furious. And little by little, they had built this idol. But if you notice by title, they still were religious. And God was so upset with this that he made them melt that idol and actually eat it. Theologians say that the reason why God was doing this is to illustrate what unrepented sin after unrepented sin after unrepented sin will do to you. That wall will make you sick. That when I looked at that time, those first 2 years in college, was I going to worship on Sunday? Yes. Was I involved in Sunday night Devo at times? Yes. I was very religious, but I was not in rhythm. Maybe for some of you, what you need to do tonight at the very end of this message is to come forward and brick by brick confess that unrepented sin and to turn and start walking a different way. Maybe for some of you, it's not that you've just been distracted. It's not that you've built up a wall. Maybe you're like me. You've just been a little too focused on yourself. You know what was interesting is when my dad came to me and shared with me this news, it's really crazy to think about how the way I took it was, well, this impacts me, and then I noticed a spiritual decline. But the cancer was what happened to him, and then he's on a spiritual rise. That's what pride will do to you. And what I noticed as I was looking back at that time is all I was focused on was myself. And that plan, that rhythm I had for my life, I was just becoming more of me. And the reason that happens, if you only focus on you, you're just going to become more of you. But if you focus on him, as we talked about earlier, you're going to become more of him. See, think about it like this. When God created the whole world, he gave you and I the capacity that nothing else had in all of creation. That the way God designed the whole world to work is that we were above the plants and the animals, the creation, but we were below him. What you and I were designed to do was actually to stand in this middle place. That's how the Creator who shaped and formed the stars designed it. So I've always kind of thought of it like this. That the way that God designed for you and I to live and to be in this middle place is kind of like a mirror at a 45-degree angle. That when God created Adam and Eve, that whenever he gave them blessing, it was to be poured out and reflected to all of creation. But what's interesting about that, it was actually meant to also go the other way too. That when good things came Adam and Eve's way, they were always supposed to what? Lift it up in praise. It was always to draw glory to the Father. But the problem then, Adam and Eve were in that garden. If you'll notice something about that time, the world was in rhythm. God said, listen, I'm going to give you a simple way to do life. Love me, love creation. But the moment that Adam and Eve started, as the Bible says, exchange the truth of God for a lie, they worshiped created things rather than the Creator. They ate that fruit. And the moment that they did this and that sin came in the world, the mirror began to shift. And when that mirror began to shift, what you'll find happening with Adam and Eve is that they began to get really frustrated with everything. They're frustrated with God. They're frustrated with each other. I mean, look what happened. I mean, right after it happened, Adam's like, she did it. Well, Satan made me do it. You know, like that was what it looked like. And that's what happens the more you only focus on you and the mirror shifts to this angle, is you get frustrated, because it's kind of like that quote I've loved, that whatever you idolize, you demonize if it's outside of God. Because what you'll do is you'll look to this and you'll look to this, and this can never deliver and give you what you want, so you become frustrated and you shatter this. Because it's never giving you what you want. It's not taking you in the direction where you want to go. And when this is shattered, like every broken mirror, if you see a broken mirror at Walmart, if you see a broken mirror at Target, and you look in it, you are not looking at an accurate reflection of who you really are. And so that's what happens when the mirror is slanted this way. It frustrates you, you shatter it, and then you can never see yourself in the way that God wants you to see yourself. That's not the way God wanted it to be. That when God gives you blessing, it's meant to reflect outward. When you get that job and you get that income, it's meant to go outward to bless other people. But I also want you to understand that when good things happen to you, it's not for you to just walk around pumping your chest. Like, I want you to think about your dating relationships. The whole goal of you dating is to bring glory to God through your dating. And the reason why I know this, because I'm going to speak to the husbands and the wives now, because we all need this reminder, that the goal of marriage itself is not to just give me what I want, but as Paul says, is to better understand or reflect Christ and his church. You are practicing right now that very reflection. Does your dating look like this, or does your dating look like that? Because I'm telling you, if it's like this, you will shatter that and it will frustrate you. So when blessing comes down, you're supposed to give it out. But when blessing comes to you, you always reflect it up in praise, never bringing glory to you, but always bringing glory to the Father. Maybe for some of you, you have received Christ. But what you notice in your life is you haven't been able to keep the beat. So maybe what some of you need tonight is you need to confess that unrepented sin, to walk down this aisle. Maybe for some of you, what you need to do is you notice, you know what, my schedule's slam-packed, but that's become a problem because now I don't have time for the most important things. Or maybe for some of you, what it is like me, you've only focused on yourself, and when you focus on yourself, you just become more of yourself. And you see where that's getting you. But I also understand there's a lot of you in this room that actually haven't made that decision to put on Christ in baptism. And that's a very dangerous thing to think of, well, as we're going to talk about tomorrow, well, I'll just do that one day. I'm not saying you have to do it tonight, but at least let that conversation start. Because we all want to grow, but you can't grow until you're born. So I don't know what it is that you have a need of tonight. But as we talked about tonight, God's wonderful grace is what is going to help you get back in rhythm. And until you are joined with him, you will only sound like that distorted noise. So Ryan, if you'll go ahead and make your way up, and if you have a need tonight, please come now while we stand and we sing this song together.